Let me thank the Secretary General, Professor Vincent, for giving us the space and for creating this occasion, and congratulate the AFDB on a successful election process. We have a new president. And you want to clap? Go ahead. Also a good chance to congratulate Patricia here, one of our keynote speakers, who's also become chair of ADFI and who will be doing a keynote. So, and welcome our distinguished panelists and speakers this morning. Secretary General, thank you very much for making the time to come, and you are welcoming us to this occasion. And so I will hand over the floor to you.
Just to say, good morning, everyone. Just to say that I must run away. So if I do run away, I didn't abandon you. Yeah, I needed to do this because you can never refuse, Ndidi. Good morning, like I said, and welcome to this important event. We're gathered here today because Africa stands as a critical juncture, a moment where sustainability, despite all the arguments, is no longer optional but essential. To implement the bold sustainability strategies that our continent urgently needs, we must mobilize substantial capital. But this raises a central and pressing question. What tools do we need to mobilize this capital effectively? And just as important, how can we design and deploy these tools to unlock the investment required for real transformation? Today, we're privileged to have in this room a wealth of expertise, leaders in sustainability, and experts in the design of frameworks, standards, and financial instruments. Your knowledge and insights are critical in shaping Africa's financial future. The African Development Bank's 10-year strategy 2024 to 2033 recognizes the urgency of mobilizing climate finance at scale to meet both current and future demands. As part of this commitment, we launched a flagship initiative such as the $10 billion African Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa, called AGGIA, and created innovative guarantee facilities like the $2 billion Room to Run, $2 billion Room to Run, designed to de-risk investment in climate resilience. But these ambitious efforts will only succeed if the African financial sector is fully engaged and aligned. And of course, I see captains of the financial sector in the room. That is why this gathering is so encouraging. We are confident that by the end of this session, we will have identified clear practical ways to align resources with opportunity and to unlock the immense value creation potential that lies within sustainable development. I use this opportunity to welcome you and to say that as you engage, please let's engage in a manner that gives us the if you like, the tools to be able to tackle the current global financial landscape as it relates to Africa. We're in a situation where Africa must stand on its own, and the only way we can do that is being innovative. And thank you for being here. I look forward to a productive and inspiring dialogue. As I said, I must leave you. because I have to prepare for the opening ceremony and also to engage the new president on a number of issues. Thank you very much. Indeed, ISSB. Of course, we worked with you to be able to come up with the letter of intent of working together. We do endorse that because that letter of intent is critical as a framework for our working together. So, bravo to you guys, ISSB. Thank you.
You know, about a year ago, what we did at the last annual meeting is we did have a roundtable where we signed the letter of intent. The whole point, and I just want to take this opportunity, Secretary General, to thank you, first of all, not just for creating this room, this platform, for a new presidency, a new era, for a new opportunity for working together, for blessing the conversation we will have. I know the room isn't as full because it's the last day. So next time we will have this session like 4 days earlier so that we have a fuller room. That's one. Two, with everybody who is on this panel, I think you've called us to action. So not just to talk about it, but actually to move from thought to action. And specifically, you've called us to talk about unlocking capital flows. And we will take that call very seriously. Thank you very much for your time. I think we have gifts. So we shall give you, yes, we shall give you a gift.
This is a climate pack that our Climate Change and Green Growth Department designed to inform on climate risks, climate opportunities on the continent. So you'll be informed.
So this came from the bank. Okay, because I was wondering whether I should declare it. Thank you.
Okay, so this gives me the opportunity to call up to the floor, and I shall do so while I speak, so you know who our speakers are. Thank you very much, SG. We have 2 keynote addresses today, and we have 4 distinguished panelists. And I will start by calling up Dr. Timi Agama. He is the Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and has come in especially for this. Also had meetings, I think you're right there. And he will be doing the opening keynote. I'm just wondering, I think what I shall do is, so that you don't have to strain, I shall call you up as well, Patricia. Patricia is the Managing Director of the Ugandan Development Bank and also the Chair of the Association of African Development Finance Institutions, and she will be giving us our second keynote today. So Patricia, if I may call you up as well. Shall I call everybody else up at the same time? Cecilia? Okay. So Cecilia Akintomiwa, ex-African Development Bank. So if you're an AFDBer, you know her very well, Cecilia Akintomide. And also a senior banker with EcoBank and also a significant investor. Frank, from the Tanzanian Agricultural Development Bank, is going to be joining us as well with a very deep insight. Please, you're welcome. With a very deep insight on the agriculture sector in particular. Yemi Badejo, who's with the African Development Bank and who is going to be also focused on finance and comes on stage as a CFO. And hiding somewhere in the crowd is Tony Nyong, who runs AFAC, is a director at the African Development Bank, and is really the core and anchor of all of these partnerships. And therewith you have all of our panelists and speakers. And what I'm just going to do very quickly is set the scene for you today and call out three major imperatives that I want to call out. So we're talking today about the toolkit in particular. And what do I mean by toolkit? So on the one hand, we're going to talk about the ISSB standards. And on the other hand, we're going to talk about the taxonomy, but we're also going to talk about different financial instruments that have the prospect of evolving opportunities to unlock capital flows and create the conducive environment we require to do so. So what I will do first of all is invite you, Dr. Timmy, to speak, and then Patricia, and then I will walk through our slides before we walk into the panel discussion.
Aquaba, that was my first shocker. Yeah, because this is my first time to Abidjan, and I've always been to Ghana. And so when I heard Aquaba, I said, am I missing my way? Or only for me to be told that it's a language or a term used in both Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire. So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, protocols have been established. I won't stand on them, neither will I sit on them. I'll just mention them. It is indeed my pleasure to be here this morning. It's a privilege to join today to discuss a challenge and an opportunity of what importance to Africa, of vital importance to Africa, mobilizing capital markets to bridge the colossal financing gap for climate adaptation in Africa and the critical role the ISSB standards play in escalating this and enabling this. Africa contributes less than 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, yet bears over 25% of climate-related losses. Experts estimate our continent faces an annual climate adaptation financing shortfall of up to 100 billion USD by 2030. The 2022 African Economic Outlook by the AFDB estimated that the continent needs around $500 billion of climate finance by 2030. Africa will also need to invest more than $3 trillion in mitigation and adaptation by 2030 in order to implement its nationally determined contributions. These figures are huge, but they are huge because the subject we are speaking to is actually huge. But it depends on us as Africans to be able to deal with this issue the way we should deal with it. These figures are not mere statistics. They translate into lost livelihoods in the Sahel, vanishing fish stocks in the Gulf of Guinea, and more frequent flooding in Lagos and Nairobi. They reflect a deepening divide between vulnerability and resilience. It's so important that we emphasize this particular issue because each and every one of us sitting here has a story to tell about what this has done to us. I have a story to tell, and I'm sure you have a story to tell. Perhaps I should give you a little of mine. My 92-year-old mother usually will go to the river to fish for fresh fish because that's what she eats. Unfortunately, that was when she was young. Today she's old and she's deprived of that. What can she get? Nothing. But even the ice fish that she would normally get comes after so long a time. What is the cause? Climate change. What is the cause? Pollution. What is the cause? Degradation. So clearly, the stark reality is undeniable. Africa, contributing minimally to historical emissions, faces severe impacts of a changing climate, which includes devastating drought-threatening food security, rising sea levels, engulfing coastlines, and intensifying storms, disrupting lives and economies. If you go to the north of Africa, of Nigeria particularly, you will see this happening live, because all through is desertification. You will look through to kilometers and you won't find any tree. All you will see is just dust blowing out of the land. And so, it is critical for all of us. It is critical for Nigeria. It is critical for Africa. The 2023 United Nations Environmental Programme Adaptation Gas Report tells us we need 202.38 billion annually for developing countries' adaptation by 2030. 2030 is only 5 years away. 2020 is so close. 2030 is just here. What have we done? What do we have? Meanwhile, our current flows and commitments are just a mere fraction of this amount. For Africa, specifically, the gap is immense, estimated to be up to 50 times the current funding levels. Adaptation finance is critically underserved due to three major reasons. The perception problem. Adaptation is often viewed as non-revenue generating and local, making it less appealing to private investors who seek return-oriented projects like solar or wind farms. We all know. Everybody talks about minimization of costs and maximization of profit. When we speak to these things, it does not show anything quantitative with regards to the money we make. But I can tell you, there's no value you can put to our lives. Our lives are much more expensive. Our lives are much more profitable than the things we think about when we think about bottom line. Hence, it is important that we take this very, very seriously. The other issue, major reason, is data and measurement gaps. Quantifying the benefits of adaptation, like avoided losses or increased resilience, remains difficult without standardized and transparent frameworks. Of course, risk aversion is one of them. Adaptation investments tend to occur in long horizon, vulnerable regions. Deterring risk-averse private capital is also a point to note. This is where our capital markets must step in and where the International Sustainable Standards Board becomes very vital. We must thank the ISSB for leading the way. We must thank them for nudging us always to making sure that we do what is needful and what is necessary. In 2017, Nigeria launched its sovereign green bond, the first in sub-Saharan Africa. Within months, it was oversubscribed by 2.5 times, driven by Nigerian pension funds and diaspora investors seeking both yield and impact. Of course, the next is in the works, and I believe strongly that it will happen sooner than later. This demonstrated that local institutional capital can be mobilized for climate projects when the right instruments and confidence-building frameworks are in place. This work that is being done by ISSB, championed by Dr. Edozien, is just one of those actions that needed to be put in place. Unfortunately, the hall is empty. The hall is empty because we probably still have not caught the bug of how important this is to us, to our country, and indeed to the world. From this journey, we learned several important lessons. Regulatory clarity matters. Clear frameworks for what qualifies as a green investment attracted long-term institutional capital. Local currency solutions are essential. Minimizing currency mismatches protected both issuers and investors. It is important that it's only within education that we can actually draw local investors into this scheme. That education is vital, it is important, and it is essential. Stakeholder collaboration is key. Regulators, multilateral agencies, and the private sector must work in concert to build trust and innovation in nascent product structures. How do we develop products? Products that people will need, products that people will speak to, products that people will understand, and products that people can measure their impact. These experiences offer a blueprint for other African countries. Start with flagship sovereign issuances, deploy blended finance vehicles to crowd in private sector capital, and align definitions and disclosure standards across jurisdictions. All that this requires is clear understanding. We need to speak with one voice and one language in order to share one vision. We need the scale, innovation, and efficiency that deep liquid capital markets offer. The key tools we will require will include green sustainability and adaptation bonds issued by sovereigns, municipalities, and corporates for projects like climate resilient roads, smart agriculture, or water infrastructure. At the SEC, as the Securities and Exchange Commission Nigeria, we have taken bold steps to making sure that the grassroots will feel our impact. What have we done? We have set up a division that will encourage municipal bond advocacy. And by that I mean reaching out to the 774 local governments in Nigeria. Getting to the people is exactly what we need to drive this purpose. Blended finance structures using concessional or philanthropic capital to de-risk and catalyze private investment is a no-brainer because we need to make sure that people are comfortable regarding the risk. And how do we do that other than through this means? Securitization, aggregating microloans for adaptation, e.g. to farmers or SMEs, into tradable instruments attractive to institutional investors. ESG integration and dedicated funds, encouraging the mainstreaming of climate adaptation into broader investment strategies, including the development of targeted adaptation funds. The ISSB standards serve as the game changer. Our experiences in Nigeria, for example, are not only innovating climate finance products, but also shaping global standards for sustainability disclosures. We, as the SEC, will drive it. We are committed to being partners in progress in making sure that this gets to everybody. So, clearly for us, it is important that as we represent the country on the International Standards, the International Sustainability Standards Board's Adoption Readiness Working Group, ARWG, which was tasked with implementing the new IFRS S1 and S2 sustainability disclosures. The SEC will make sure that we put our tax to work. The ARWG finalizes roadmaps for adoption, publicly exposed by the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria and SEC Nigeria between March 3rd and March 14, 2024. Feedback was rigorously reviewed and integrated. The roadmap outlines early adoption, voluntary adoption, January 1st, 2024 through December 31st, 2026, and mandatory adoption beginning January 1st, 2027. All entities, therefore, excluding government bodies, must comply with staggered timelines. This leadership positions Nigeria at the forefront of transparent, comparable, and decision-useful sustainability reporting across Africa. So, why does ISB matter for adaptation finance? Risk transparency is one. The IFRS S2 mandates the disclosure of material physical climate risk. For example, flood, drought, heat stress, enhancing the ability of investors to price risk accurately. Comparability and standardization, S1 and S2, create a global baseline, enabling investors to compare climate strategies across borders and sectors, vital for scaling African adaptation projects. Opportunity disclosure, IFRS S2 also requires companies to disclose climate-related opportunities, bringing adaptation investments from ambiguity towards investability. Investor confidence is also critical because consistent, reliable data reduces uncertainty and transaction costs, unlocking capital flow into climate adaptation. Despite our advances, capital markets remain fragmented in Africa, with over 40 national exchanges, divergent listing rules, and separate trading currencies. These are issues that we must tackle as we try to bring in more capital into Africa. One of the things we are doing as chairman of the West African Securities Regulators Association, and indeed a strong advocate for WAMIC and WAMAC, we would, as much as possible within the sub-Saharan Africa, make sure that people understand what we need to do and consistently bring things together in order for us to have a common language and a common denominator in driving finance into Africa. Institutional investors, such as pension funds in Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa, are mostly confined to domestic assets, missing cross-border diversification and scale. If we say we are Africa, we are our brother's keeper, we must have a way to allow the trade run through Africa indeed and run through our routes. Harmonized standards and shared ESG taxonomies can reduce duplication and post-trade friction, while regional issuance and joint underwriting can expand the investor base. To scale adaptation finance, we must deepen regional market integration, harmonize ESG standards, and deploy tools like credit enhancements to de-risk early-stage climate investments. One of the objectives and goals that we decided at the SEC to pursue is to set up an African Securities Regulators Association in order to bind African securities regulators so that we are able to passport our rules and regulations, making sure that life is easy for the issuer and indeed for the investor. Therefore, we call on project developers and private sector actors to present bankable, pipeline-ready projects with robust environmental and social metrics. Engage in public-private dialogue to shape policy and product innovation. In conclusion, closing the climate adaptation financing gap in Africa is not a distant aspiration, but a development imperative, and one that demands our collective ingenuity and capital. We must think out of the box. We cannot remain in the box and expect capital to flow, because when we are in the box, we are clogging the box, and certainly capital will not get in there. So, for us, the recent journey in Nigeria proves that it can be done by integrating our markets, aligning standards, adopting the ISSB framework, and mobilizing institutional capital across borders. We can build a climate-resilient future for all Africans today and yet unborn. Let us seize this moment, therefore, as regulators, investors, governments, standard setters, and development partners to deepen African capital markets and finance the resilience of our continent and our people. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share our thoughts and to share our vision regarding Africa in this particular noble and, of course, vicious race. Thank you so much.
So now it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Ojangole. And let me just add that Dr. Agama's PhD, surprise, surprise, is actually in the impact of cryptocurrency operations on macroeconomic variables. So interesting connection in your role as the DG SEC, where you're also emphasizing the regulation of digital assets as well as the modernization of capital markets and also the embrace of sustainability. Likewise, Dr. Ojangole's PhD just concluded, again, something else to congratulate you on, is on the structural transformation, private sector credit and growth implications for employment and economic growth in Uganda. And of course, not just is your leadership at the Uganda Development Bank so important, it's also about connecting DFIs and what you're now doing at the Pan-African level, unlocking capital flows, which we're going to hear about also from the private sector. So, Dr. Patricia, over to you.
Thank you for inviting me to share some thoughts. Can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yes, so representing DFIs or national DFIs on the continent, our role, as is clearly known, is to mobilize and channel finance to high impact projects and programs, basically enabling capital to flow where it is required. Most of our mandates are promoting sustainable social economic development. It means investing in projects and programs that deliver sustainable impact, and for this you require sustainable finance. I'm just trying to create a link between sustainable finance and what we do on ground, investing in sustainable projects. And also to link it to the subject that we are talking about or discussing around sustainability reporting. So how do we generate, deliver, measure, and then report the sustainable impact? So sustainable finance was essential for Africa, just like it is now and in the future. But to unlock it, transparency is key. And this is mainly because investors and finance providers must be satisfied that their funds are being deployed for the very purpose that they intend. In my experience mobilizing resources globally, this is usually key. Mobilizing sustainable finance to deploy where? Investors require clear, consistent, comparable data to access sustainability risks and opportunities. Lack of transparency undermines trust. It increases perceived risk and it limits capital flows. And transparency enables alignment between financial returns and development impact. In the bank that I lead, we talk about profitability through sustainability. And what we have found ourselves doing a lot of times is, yes, we must report, but report what? And we have found that if we do or spend our day doing things around generating that impact, then we have what to report, and we have accurate data, or we are able to generate accurate data that then we report. So just not profitability through sustainability. Basically, if you don't implement, what will you report? So delivering to your society, to your shareholders, to your economy, to our environment, and then report on that. So again, sustainable finance without sustainable projects would make issues around data and reporting a bit complicated. I like to look at the two together, and that is where impact is seen. And if you do not have the sustainable projects, then you cannot deploy sustainable finance. So just completing the kind of the loop. But what are the current challenges we have in Africa when it comes to what we are discussing? Of course, we see fragmented and inconsistent sustainability reporting across African institutions. And that is rightly so because the subject is largely new and everyone is trying to align based on the information and content they get from varied sources. And therefore, that is why harmonization of standards and developing a taxonomy is very, very important for Africa. There is limited capacity in some countries for environmental, social, governance, and related disclosures. And as a result, difficulty attracting global sustainable investment due to lack of standardized data. And I think for me, this is the very case for ISSB adoption, because it then provides a global baseline for sustainability-related disclosures, consolidating standards like TCFD and SASB. It will help align African institutions with global reporting practices. It enhances trust among international investors and partners, and facilitates entry into ESG capital markets and sustainable finance instruments like green bonds, sustainability-linked bonds, etc. At UDBL, we're actually in this very process of trying to see if we can mobilize green bonds or sustainability-linked bonds from international debt markets. But one of the key things that we have to do with the transaction advisor supporting us on this is to develop an ESG framework which can be acceptable at the global and international level. The ISSB adoption supports long-term resilience, especially in climate vulnerable and transition risk-heavy economies, and this is what we face in most of our African economies. So what is the role of DFIs, or what is the role of ADFI? Of course, adopting international best practice in transparency and accountability tools. This is very, very important for national DFIs. You know, being national DFIs, we have a character. And one of the things that we must see is to try to align and adopt international best practices, because we operate in a global setting and global environment. We must lead by example in adopting the AISSB aligned disclosures in our reporting portfolios. And to this, ADFI is working around building capacity among our member DFIs on ISSB implementation. And then we'll also be working on promoting harmonization of sustainability standards across the continent and supporting policy engagement to integrate ISSB in national regulatory frameworks. In terms of call to action, we're encouraging African governments, regulators, financial institutions to prioritize adoption of these standards and emphasizing collaboration across sectors, public, private, development partners to build the infrastructure for transparent, sustainable finance. With the right tools and shared commitment, Africa can unlock the capital it needs for a truly sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. We're going to let Patricia run. As you can see, we're playing musical chairs up here. So since I now need to moderate the panel, we're going to let Patricia run. But we're going to keep the DG Sec. And he's going to be part of the panel. So congratulations on your gift. Congratulations on your chairmanship. And we're looking forward to you taking action to everything that you discussed. See you again soon. Applause for her. Yes, there are slides, but I think it's much more exciting to actually listen to the panel. And so I think there's an email address up there. If anybody wants these slides, which give you a deeper dive on the ISSB, I'm happy to send them to you. And if we do have time or we get bored of listening to the panelists, I can always walk through the slides if I need to deep dive on anything. Tony, I don't know whether you have a microphone right next to you and whether we can start with you. So obviously the theme of today is looking into the toolkit, fostering a conducive environment for sustainable capital flows. We've heard about different toolkits. We've already heard about the importance of the capital markets, and DG Sec has spoken about the role that the ISSB plays in that regard. Yesterday, there was a very important roundtable around the taxonomy, creating a common language across Africa. AFAC itself is a collaborative platform where different entities are working together towards unlocking capital flows. So maybe you want to speak a little bit in terms of helping us lay the ground. Why are we talking about looking into the toolkit, and how are these tools, and what kind of tools do we have in mind in terms of unlocking and mobilizing capital flows in Africa?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks to the colleagues for being here. Let me start by saying that the African Development Bank did not just stumble into sustainability. It's something that has been carefully designed. 2009, let me just take us back a little bit. Everybody kept saying Africa has a lot of resources, opportunities, when they talk about biodiversity, it was Africa and so on. But then we did a study with the World Wildlife Foundation that showed that Africa's ecological footprint was bigger than what people thought and was actually depriving us of the benefits of development. So that led to the publication of the Africa Ecological Footprint. 2 years after that, we developed the first 10-year strategy of the bank that hinged specifically on green growth, transitioning to green growth. And we're the first MDB to actually set our 10-year strategy based on that. That was from 2012 to 2023. The SG has talked about the current one, which also is a continuation of that. So this has been very important to us. And on the other hand, we also find that when you look at the climate change space, though we look beyond just climate, look at the climate change space. We contribute the least, but bear the greatest of the impact. So it's important for us that in being able to implement our common objective as a bank, we cannot afford to say there used to be a road somewhere there used to be a bridge somewhere there that has been washed off, wiped away or something. So we build these issues of sustainability, environmental, social governance into every of our investments. And what do? We have several tools that are helping us to address these issues, either to address the environmental consequences or the climate change imperatives and so on. And so what we've done is we have several tools. We have, which my colleagues will talk about in detail also later. For instance, we have our green bonds. These are quite important. The DG has talked about Nigeria being the first to launch a sovereign green bond in Africa, which is true. So we have that, and we worked with the country to make that happen. Then we have also established tools like the gender marker, which we should not ignore because that's what is helping us to ensure that we take development to everybody. Then we have tools like the environmental and social impact assessment, where we screen all our projects. We have the climate safeguard system that allows us to screen and categorize every project based on these tools. These have become very necessary. Then we also have the ISSB standards, which is a welcome idea because when we looked at the predecessor to that, which was the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures, we found that the participation of African countries was very low, or our institutions. And being able to establish the ISSB, has let many of us see the other side, the benefits of bringing in our countries to apply global standards in things that they do. But we realize that basically we can't do what we did to do alone. For instance, we received just about 11% of the climate funds that we need, the need and what is available. And so we established AFAC, the Africa Financial Alliance on Climate Change, 2018, with a goal of seeing how we can strengthen our local financial sector to allow them play in that space, play in the global space, channel resources to the organizations like Patricia has talked about. So that was how we've been able to bring that and create AFAC for what it is. But with AFAC, with AFAC, we've been able to now say, what are the things we're able to do better? We've signed on to the ISSB standards, IS1 and 2, which we see as a very important instrument in bringing transparency, in bringing us to be able to implement global standards. And we've been able to develop a taxonomy of climate finance, like you've talked about, it doesn't make sense for us to have very different definitions of the same thing all over. It's difficult for us to coordinate and report. We're dealing with issues of enhanced transparency framework, which is also very important in helping countries to attract resources to them. So broadly, we being able to apply ourselves these standards have allowed us to mobilize resources. And we've also supported African development finance institutions to be able to access some of these funds that we're talking about through the adoption of these global standards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. What I've realized is that actually when I sit, it's much more difficult for me to drive a dynamic conversation and make participants jump among each other. So I'm going to struggle with that a bit. And if I'm struggling, I'm going to get up and sit on that podium. And then the other thing I realized that we've lost the slides. So maybe the reason for doing that is to grab a few photos with this beautiful backdrop that you have up there so that we can use that. So please go ahead, shoot those photos, and then at some point, please give me the slides back because we're going to walk through the questions in that regard. I'm torn now between asking you, Frank, about the realities on agriculture and asking you, Cecilia, on what's happening with the private sector before I come back to Yemi and Dr. Agama, Timmy. But I'm going to start with you, Frank, because you've got your microphone all handy. From an agriculture perspective, so Uganda, again, as well as Tanzania, as well as Nigeria, as we've heard, have adopted the ISSB standards. And if we had the slides, I would make the point about the reason why these standards are important is because it's about embedding sustainability-related risks and opportunities in general purpose financial statements. Now, one area where this is particularly essential, and we heard about it when you spoke about your mother and fish, agriculture, which is something that is your mainstay and you're an expert in. Can you speak to us a little bit about why, one, agriculture has to take into cognizance climate and sustainability, and some of the instruments that you have put in place in terms of unlocking capital flows and creating opportunities for the Tanzanian agricultural market?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lil, for that question. My name, as been introduced, is Frank Nyabulege. I'm the Managing Director of Tanzania Agricultural Development Bank. As has been introduced, my name is Frank Nyabulege. I'm the Managing Director of Tanzania Agricultural Development Bank, which is a pioneer financial institutions specialized in agricultural financing as a development bank in Tanzania. Basically, as you said, in today's world, sustainability is very, very important. And especially when you talk agriculture in Africa, particularly in Tanzania, where it contributes probably more than 30% of the GDP, employs more than 66% of the workforce. So it's very, very important to look into sustainability. Now, what I want to talk this morning is, and probably just before I get into that, first and foremost, I would like to thank so much AFDB. AFDB have really held our hand, TADB, since when we started. When we started, the initial money that we got into came from AFDB, which was around $85 million. And we've seen other sports, we got $66 million last year from AFDB. And among that, we got, which is now what I'm going to speak about, is Technical Assistance Fund from AFDB. And then when you got this Technical Assistance Fund from AFDB, one, it assisted us to establish an internal sustainability frameworks. And of course, we worked with a Global Center for Adaptation when we got these funds from AFDB. And then we developed these sustainability frameworks. When we developed these sustainability frameworks, we came up with about 3 or 4 or 5 things. One was the strategy, especially on climate smart agriculture. And why did we come with a strategy? Because the strategy is what is going to show us how can we be able to deal with the climate smart agriculture. So I will speak more on how we've done on that. But also we developed some products which are climate smart agriculture products. And also we developed some policies. Two policies, of course, we did, which one was a financial risk management policy, and another one was on environment and social management policy. Of course, monitoring in today's world is very, very, very important. So we developed an NME framework in terms of monitoring. So as I said, through, I can call it one of its kind technical assistance funds, which we got or received from AFDB, as the bank did an in-depth climate risk assessment. And this, as I said, it was with the assistance of Global Center for Adaptation, which was a consultant, and we developed climate risk management tools. So these tools that we developed, we included around four things. One was the heat maps. Why heat maps? Because we wanted to hotspot areas which we think that they are vulnerable to climate smart. So having known the places or areas that are vulnerable, then you can even be able to develop climate smart products that can be able to be financing to the client. But also we come up with a climate due diligence tool for climate, on the transactional level, whereby now our business development team, they can use this tool to ensure that when they are doing the analysis or when they are pitching on the transaction level, they can be able to know exactly the challenges or the climate risks that are there on that transaction. But also, we came up with the climate stress testing. But most importantly, we developed an adaptation catalog on the value chain and fact sheets, so that which we have been sharing even with our financial partners. What we do as TADB, we don't only work for ourselves, because being a pioneer development bank, especially in agriculture, we do with our financial partners, and we have what we call catalytic role as a development bank to ensure that banks, being commercial banks, being microfinance banks or community banks, they lend to agriculture, because we see that agriculture is the backbone of our country. So we have, whatever knowledge we get, we also pass over to our colleagues. So we have really been able to ensure that we assist these banks, commercial banks, microfinance banks, as well as community banks, to ensure through these fact sheets, so that they can be able to do that. So,
Frank, I'm going to come back to you, but this is where I start with this bouncing around, because we have to come up with action points at the end. And there are a few things that you've said. One, looking to your right, and looking at AFDB, because you just happen to both be sitting in that corner. You've made it very clear that it's as a result of AFDB funding
yes,
that you are actually able to bolster your capital and get started. So the first thing that we need to pass on to others, and I'm looking to my left right now, which happens to be a jurisdiction, Nigeria, and I'm going to jump at you, Cecilia, and then I'm going to come back to you, because I know you have two more things to talk about. The first question is whether actually the Agriculture Development Bank in Nigeria has been as successful, one, in tapping into support from the African Development Bank, like the Tanzanian Agricultural Development Bank, and secondly, the second point you just made is you work very closely with the private sector, commercial banks, all the way through to microfinance banks, because the supply chain, the last mile in agriculture is so absolutely essential.
yes.
I heard that right. So I'm actually going to challenge you, Cecilia, and Dr. Agama, jump in, of course, if you have a strong position there. Has this also been the case in Nigeria? And if not, if the answer is no, then my question to you, Frank, will be, we need to take that story and pass it on to other jurisdictions, because this is also about synergy? And I will pass that task to you, Yemi. But Cecilia, that question goes directly to you.
Thank you very much. So, my hat is not necessarily a Nigerian hat because EcoBank operates across 33 African countries. But my recollection is I'm not sure that we have tapped into the resources of the African Development Bank from a financial perspective. But I think from a knowledge perspective and creating awareness, there's been some growing, I would say, relationship. But from EcoBank's experience, we've mobilized, I think, about 750 million US dollars over 4 years on sustainability and a mixture of instruments. And what has been clear, so 2021, we did 350 million US dollars. We issued notes on the London Stock Exchange. Our experience from that, from a supply side, it was 3.6 times oversubscribed. So supply is abundantly available. You just have to be able to structure it, have the track record in the markets, and you can have a similar experience. Pricing was also reasonable. Now, on the demand side, which was us deploying those funds across the continent, it was deployed without any problem. I mean, we were out hungry for more in less than 3 months. So supply, demand exists, but I said London Stock Exchange and US dollars. So immediately you know that there's a currency mismatch there. And what we need to start doing is finding ways of actually doing something similar but tapping into local currency. Reason being, a lot of the infrastructure that we're building or we're adapting or a lot of the green projects are not FX generating projects. They are actually local currency projects. So we need to bring this back home. We need to be working with, and the great thing, Nigeria, you've issued the sustainability principles, and that's provided a good guidance framework. But we need to start seeing more of that across the continent so that we're going to start seeing local currency, green bonds. 2, we also did a 200 million sustainability linked note, so 200 million US dollars sustainability linked loan with the European DFIs. And that was a very good experience. It was led by Proparco, and not only did they provide funding for sustainability-related projects or green projects, but there was also helping to build our capacity as an institution. And we're going to be needing a lot of this for commercial banks across the continent because this is new, relatively, and capacity of bankers, you absolutely need to build that capacity. To a large extent, sustainability is being looked at from a climate change perspective. And so the conversation is taking place with the risk team. But this is a conversation that goes beyond the risk team. This is actually also a funding conversation. This is a business conversation. It's about the core business strategies of our banks. And so we need to, it's great that we recognize the risks, but we also need to go beyond having a risk discussion to a true business discussion. And I am so happy that this conversation is taking place at AFDB annual meetings, and Professor Anthony Young is here. And one of the things that I think we absolutely need to do quickly is a conversation on how do we train our bankers. I mean, they're the ones doing origination of projects. So how do we train them to start originating these green projects? You know, we've talked about the issue of taxonomy and why it's so important. But you know, folks ask the same question. I need to do an adapted highway. My previous highway project before sustainability discussions, and now this highway project with us talking about adaptation. Who defines what is an adapted project? Who certifies that this project as designed, this infrastructure as designed, actually meets those adaptation standards? So these are some of the conversations, and these are areas where we need to partner with the DFIs. Thank you.
Cecilia, thank you so much, and thank you especially for those questions as well. I see DG. Go ahead.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I just want to pull us back a little bit, because we are here us discussing about sustainability, funding, and all of that. I see a lot of banking stories. It's not banking, you know, in my perspective. It's capital market. Everything about funding, really speaking, especially when it comes to projects, agriculture, transportation, you know, infrastructure, it's long term. And when we speak long term, we're speaking about capital market. We're speaking about, and when it comes to domestication and domestic, you know, capital raising, it's capital market. How do you harness the domestic capital among the people, the institutions? In fact, when you speak about pension funds, long-term money, it is capital market. How do we restructure projects around that? How do we originate from the capital market side, particularly providing instruments that fits the mindset of the people, knowing that it is going to create an impact, either social or change the bottom line of these institutions? So for me, it is speaking to that. And you see, let's not get it wrong. There is capital in Africa. There's capital in Nigeria. Most recently, there was a shameful incident that happened in Nigeria. I'm sure all of us probably will have heard about it. It's called the CBEX, you know, scandal, where some young men decided to get money from Nigerians and to the tune of over 835 million US dollars, 1.33 trillion naira, and went away with the money. Imagine just half of that money being channeled into the market, into sustainability, into changing lives, into bringing impact, and into getting people to understand that we are looking out for them and their future. So let's begin to think capital market. Let's begin to think about creating instruments that people will be interested in and that affects their lives. And there is nobody here that food does not affect the life, road does not affect the life, hospital does not affect the life, infrastructure does not have, there is just nobody here that doesn't have those impact, you know, as a vision to look up to. So for us, I believe strongly that Africa, we have the opportunity, we have the skill, and we have the power. Let's use it, let's unleash it, and we'll get progress.
I love the energy and the passion that is evolving. I love also that debate between banking sector, what is the role of the commercial banking sector, the deepening of the capital markets, which is absolutely key, and what you've both agreed on is that we need local currency bonds. And then also in terms of volumes, you've both spoken about, and I'm moving back towards Yemi, I'll come to you, and then I'm coming back to you, Frank. For example, take this number. Climate resilient infrastructure requires $10 billion per annum. Right now, we're raising, if we're lucky, $5 billion per annum, so there's a gap. But we're here also to talk about toolkits and tools. And Yemi, yesterday you were speaking about sustainability reporting as a potential tool. So the language that we require, and I think actually, if my clicker works, which it doesn't, I was going to show a couple of slides which actually speaks to getting sustainability into accounting language. Clicker is not working. So Yemi, right over to you. Sustainability reporting as a toolkit. And AFDB itself has a task force that has adopted the ISSB standards. We've just listened to the need to have a language and to grasp risks, but also opportunities that have the potential to unlock capital flows, and not just in other currencies, also synergistically within national economies, but also at a Pan-African level, significant capital in local currency. So can you speak to some initiatives that are underway in that regard, especially in your role as CFO at AFDB?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. So I would start on, we're talking about toolkits, and one of the interesting perspectives to this is we've got two major players. One is the provider of funds, and then the users of these funds. So the question is, how do I ensure that both the users and the providers are able to meet agreed terms and make sure that funding is made available for sustainability? So, if you see now, a whole lot of decisions, business decisions, have strong sustainability impact. So what that means is that every investor is sitting back and saying, I want to put my money in businesses that are very sustainable. So maybe I'll just provide some background from AFDB's perspective, as in what have we been doing on sustainability funding. So in the bank, we've got before now, I'll tell us before now and what we currently have. We have a green bond framework, and on the bank side, we've done since 2013, we've done green bonds of about $5 billion. And that's about 19 transactions that we've done to date. And on social bond, what we've done is we started that in 2017, and then we've done about $12 billion in social bonds, and we have a framework called the social bond framework in the bank. And what that has helped us to do is able to focus on very sustainability smart projects, and then be able to drive this type of initiative across Africa. Sometime 2023, we issued a new sustainability framework, trying to collapse both the green and the social bond into one, and then being able to unlock capital using other sustainability finance instruments. For example, hybrid capital. Recently, the bank issued one sometime 2024, which was on hybrid capital and was also ESG labeled. So what the bank has been doing is to say, how do I get what the investors need, right? So, I like what the DG said about the framework that they've issued in Nigeria. We've got an internal framework that helps the bank to be able to speak to what the investors want. In fact, one of the few things that we've noticed in recent past is that the investors are even asking, which a whole lot of issuers in the market also do, is to say, can you please issue me like a report that is audited, showing that the funds that were made available to you are indeed channeled to climate resilient, climate smart projects. Because they want feedback. They want to be able to sit back and say, if I give money in Africa, if I give money in Europe, they're going to be comparable. I'm not going to be worried about the kind of information you're going to be providing to me, which is where the ISSB standard comes in. So what has ISSB done? What they've done is to say, we want to create that link between the investor and the users of the fund. We want to be able to provide globally sustainable and comparable information that users of funding can take as the global baseline for decision making, right? And what does that entail? What do we need to do as a business, right? What then needs to happen is, how do we key into this whole concept of the ISSP? A whole lot of people will come and say, okay, it's difficult, it's tough, it's this, it's that. The reality is that you need to really speak to what the investors want. If we need to get funding, then you've got to be speaking the language of the investor, which is where, you know, the ISSB standard is a very good tool that will help you within that context. You know, I mentioned something on auditing. And I mean, what that means is that the investors, they've got this money, but they need you to be able to demonstrate to them that, you know, the project for which you want to, you know, apply these funds are comparable. I want to be able to have some level of assurance that if somebody is funding power in Africa, and then the provider of fund has made this fund available, they want to be able to sit back and say, if I'd given this money to another user, say in Europe, I can conveniently go and sit back and say, the returns that I anticipate, the value that I want to create through this financing will be achieved. So, you know, so the interesting part is that from AFB, from my bank's perspective, what we've done is also to try and key into this whole idea. What we've done, we've set up like an internal steering committee that is leading this initiative from a reporting perspective. We've also leveraged existing infrastructure that we have. Tony's team have got a whole lot of resources that they've put out there. So what we're doing internally is to say, we can't reinvent the wheel. Although we want to go to Rolls-Royce, but we're going to start with the kind of movement that we have, the kind of car that is available. So we're taking on every report that is available, the data that we currently have on sustainability. And, you know, a lot of people talk about data being the biggest issue, right? I totally agree with you. But you've got to start somewhere. You've got to sit back and say, what data do we currently have? And by the way, there's also some concept within the ISSB standard. One is proportionality, and also talking around how do I ensure that I report looking at the current skill that I have, looking at the data that I have, such that I don't have to put in so much undue cost and effort in meeting this requirement. You know, you've got to just start that. One of the other things we also do at the bank is in terms of stakeholder engagement. At the MDB's level, we've got what we call committee of practice, where MDBs meet like every quarter to discuss critical issues as to how do we identify the key risks affecting sustainability. What are the key opportunities? What are the key changes in our processes, risk processes, financial reporting, every area of the operations, so that we can key into this whole concept of sustainability, so that the investor at the end can sit back. Like I said, the assurance is, how do I ensure any money that I make available in Africa is comparable to any money I've made available anywhere else across the world? Thank you very much for that. Yeah.
Yemi, you're so passionate. In fact, you know, I might as well put you forward to make ISSB presentations going forward, because you explain them in such simple terms. I want to open up the floor to questions, and I want to just run through these slides to get back to you, Frank, so that you can make those final 2 points, and then Tony, be on standby. And essentially just 2 things, Yemi, that you've said. I just want to underscore them. One is that the sustainability standards are now next to the accounting standards on the one hand. Secondly, that we're focusing on a company's prospects and cash flows. So we've shifted and connected sustainability and unlocking capital flows, which is a very important shift that we've made. Decision useful information that is cost effective being absolutely key. And then secondly, this investor focus that we're talking about, which is why material disclosures, why investor focused. It's really unlocking capital flows and, like you said, making sure that we have a common and a shared language to make sure that we are actually able to get, for example, in terms of the gap we have on the financing. I'm trying to get to the industry specific standards for you, Frank, and it's stopped moving. So since we can't move, assurability that you talked about, again, everything that's on the slides, you can see that you made the presentation, because if we don't have the assurance of sustainability related data and information, then we have an issue. We're still stuck. We're not moving forward. I'm actually trying to get to the point where I'm at the agriculture specific industry based metrics. And that's what I want to speak to specifically. If there's somebody else who has control of the slides, maybe you can move them for me. And if not, then we'll just stop here. Frank, and if the room has a question, I would ask you to be on standby or perhaps even to come forward, because then I can hand the microphone to you immediately after Frank has spoken. You were speaking about 2 additional tools and initiatives that you've undertaken in Tanzania before I stopped you the last time on the one hand, and specifically also for agriculture. Because if we talk about addressing investor requirements in terms of disclosures, we're talking about metrics that are not always created, because standards, in this instance, Africa has been very proactive. Nigeria started first of the 36 countries that have adopted the ISSB standards. 8 of them, so in other words, 25% of those countries are African entities, and yet this is an ongoing process. So in terms of shaping these standards going forward, how critical is it that Africa is engaged in actually identifying metrics? And in the agriculture sector, how similar are the metrics that we have on the African continent to the metrics that you will find where the bulk of capital is, namely in foreign denominated capital flows?
Okay, as you said, when anybody who wants to give you capital or wants to invest into you, first and foremost, he looks into sustainability. And with the current IFRS, especially on S1 and S2 requirement as a disclosure on our financials, that becomes imperative for all the financial institutions to ensure that you adhere to the standards. And for you to adhere to the standards, of course, that's what for us as TADB, we've done. And I'm happy to report that while the regulator wants the sustainability reporting from next year, TADB, with the assistance of AFDB, we're going to do our first reporting this year. So we have really gone ahead. And that's what makes confident to our development partners when they want to give us funds. Because being a development bank, which we don't take deposits from the general public, we should really be able up ahead of our game so that at least we give the confidence to development partners when they come and see that you guys, you work according to the standards. It's easier for them to believe and trust and probably seek funds more, either from themselves or from the other development partners. So as I was saying, that for us as TADB, first and foremost, we need to know that the IFRS S1 and S2 is now mandatory. So everybody is going to be the IFRS standards that we have really been doing or reporting to our financials. This sustainability standards is going to be mandatory. So it's the responsibility of financial institutions and banks like ours to ensure we are there to the requirements, which is S1 and S2. And in so doing, that's what we've said, that we developed tools which can be able to be conformant to what is the requirement of S1 and S2. And we said that this year we're going to do the first report on SA1 and S2 ahead of what probably the central bank, which is a Bank of Tanzania, requires for us to do next year. So, as I said, TADB is doing the characteristic role in agricultural financing in the country. However, being the bank that we are given the characteristic role, we also train the commercial banks. We also train, we have set even ourselves, while the AFDB are giving us technical assistance funds, we also set funds internally. We know mostly the smallholder farmers are the ones which have been affected. We have established internally what we call smallholder transformation unit. The smallholder transformation unit goes out there to do trainings to this smallholder to ensure that whatever they are doing, they are climate smart related agricultural functions, which it creates also an opportunity to the bank. Why? Because through the heat map that we have established, we see that probably in area A, be it either the normal agriculture, we set it into the crop farming or even in livestock. So let me give you an example of livestock. You have to ensure that probably the breeds that you are bringing in, they are resistance to the area, the weather or the climate in the areas that you are going to be financing. The same in the agriculture on the crop is to come up probably with a seed that are climate resilient seeds. So that's the area when you establish all these things in agriculture, they assist you to ensure that you can be able to move and move forward. And that becomes the sustainability, because the funds that we get from the funders, the fund that we get from the government, for us, we get most of the funds from the government. How sustainable are they going to be? And on the development end is to ensure that we only don't get returns in terms of profit, but there is development on our people, and that is sustainable.
Thank you so much. I'm looking out at the room and seeing whether, so we've heard you speak a little bit about, I see 2 questions in the room. In fact, I see 3, I see 4. I want to remind you that we have 15 minutes to go. So I'm going to take those questions immediately. I don't know whether somebody can help me with passing around the microphone. And I'm going to ask you to please be brief. I'll take all the questions at the same time. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll pass it to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Ibekure Jasper Radiri, President All Africa Association for Small and Medium Enterprises. Firstly, I want to commend all the panelists and inclusive of the moderator for your interventions thus far. Very quickly, my question is going to be broad-minded. Taking it from the lens of economic prosperity in Africa, what has been the impact of the sustainability conversations across the continent? You know, would anyone want to give us a view or a perspective? What has been the impact of these conversations? Thank you.
Great question. What's been the impact? And I'm going to do a round, because I think we just have enough time for a round, and that is about responding to questions. There's a question right here. Okay, so this is the second question. The third question will be right there. The fourth question.
Thank you very much. My name is Vincent. I think we spoke about capital markets a bit here. Now, we're also looking at a changing environment, both geopolitically and economically. How are we going to use these standards and the understanding of capital markets to support regional integration as we're seeing elements such as CBAM and such emerging? Is that an opportunity for foreign FX income and capital investment that can be renewable, or is that a limitation?
Is this a threat or an opportunity? I love that question, especially regarding CBAM and from a regional perspective, how does that look from an African point of view? And that ties in nicely with that question of what has been the impact of sustainability. Our third question.
Moi, je vais parler en français.
Alors, oui. Alors, attendez, peut-être un petit peu, parce que tout peut vous comprendre. La quatrième question, peut-être, is it English? En français aussi? OK. Alors, juste un moment pour que tous prennent les speakers. Est-ce qu'il y a une femme? Is there a lady that would like to ask the fifth question so that we have some gender? Ahmed, bienvenue. Voilà, we have our fifth question, and by this time, everybody's got their headphones on, and we can... Alors, elle va revenir. Juste une question en anglais, alors après ça, les deux questions en français. Madame, en anglais. Voilà, merci.
I didn't expect you to start with me, but thank you very much. My name is Edith Adera from the African Development Bank. I have a quick question related to the African diaspora. How can we tap into the funds that are available from African diaspora? We tend to hear of pension funds and others, but we have a lot of African diaspora that bring in money, which I think we can tap into for development. Thank you.
It's a brilliant question because actually remittances into the continent are a multiplicity of grants that come into the continent. So it's a great, great question. Alors, en français.
Merci beaucoup à l'auditoire. Je suis Moreau Jean-Jacques. Je suis secrétaire général de la Fondation et la FISU. D'abord, je voulais savoir quelle est la place de la société civile dans leur financement. Et de deux, au niveau de notre fondation et la FISU, nous appuyons les agriculteurs, surtout dans le domaine rural, afin que ces agriculteurs aient des semences. On offre des semences à ces agriculteurs, on les suit à travers un expert en agriculture. Mais le problème de nos agriculteurs aujourd'hui, ils disent qu'ils ont un problème au niveau de l'eau pour l'alimentation de leur culture. Concernant les fourrages, donc actuellement, on est en train de voir comment les mettre ensemble afin que nous puissions les apporter un forage d'eau. Est-ce que c'est possible d'avoir des financements dans ce cas? Merci.
Alors, Franck, je pense que c'est pour toi. Alors, la dernière question, en français.
Merci beaucoup. C'est Ouattara Diakalia de l'initiative de la société civile pour l'objectif du développement durable en Côte d'Ivoire, ISODD. Merci beaucoup. Ma première question s'adresse au monsieur, le premier intervenant. Alors, il a parlé d'une mobilisation de 3 000 milliards de dollars en termes pour l'adaptation climatique. Alors, la question que je voulais poser, quelle est la stratégie mise en place par la BAD pour pouvoir contribuer à la mobilisation de ces fonds-là et à hauteur de combien? C'est ma première question. La deuxième, dedans, il a parlé des poissons congelés et il a mis l'accent sur le côté pollution. Mais moi, je voudrais lui poser la question en termes d'impact sur la santé même des populations. Parce que quand on va au marché, on paye à moindre coût ces poissons-là. Et enfin, le monsieur de Tanzanie. Vous avez parlé de durabilité à l'agriculture. Comment le ménage se fait? Surtout quand on sait qu'au niveau de l'agriculture, c'est destruction et autres. Voilà. Et enfin, quelle est la part du budget national dans l'appui à l'agriculture, c'est-à-dire au niveau de la mobilisation des ressources nationales? Et pour terminer, le monsieur qui est au bout. Oui, il a parlé que les investisseurs ont de l'argent, c'est une réalité. Mais aussi, il ne faut pas perdre de vue le fait que ces investisseurs-là, parfois, viennent aussi avec des agendas cachés. Ils ont des objectifs non dévoilés et ça se heurte avec la réalité du terrain qui fait que c'est difficile. D'ailleurs, les deux ne collaborent pas ensemble. Voilà, quelle est sa perception de la chose? Merci.
La prochaine fois, on va te montrer ici. Okay, so the thing I would like to add to everyone on the panel is if I look at this, actually that's odd, the number isn't on here, but I know that there's $54 trillion already hooked up to the ISSB standards as members of the International Advisory Group on ISSB. And only a tiny fraction of a fraction of a fraction flows to the African continent. So that's the additional challenge I'd like to put through all of our panelists, and I'm going to start with you, Yemi, because the last finger was pointed at you. And then we'll just do one last closing round, responding to the questions. Ahmed, merci de revenir. And then it's over to you. Starting with you, Yemi. And just bearing in mind that we have to keep an eye on the time.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think the first thing is to speak to his question, which is on how do you access the funds. The reality is that there's a whole lot of, for example, AFDB is is a globally rated entity. So it gives us that opportunity to be able to leverage at that level. But, I think there was a session yesterday that talks about de-risking, right? De-risking is saying that even where you cannot get the funds directly, we can create infrastructure through blended finance that can help you to, for banks to be able to provide the financing to you. He just mentioned she just mentioned something on about 54 trillion that is available. So the question will be, how do you access this fund? What are the requirements? Which is where the toolkit becomes very interesting. What are the toolkits? What do you need to make available for you to be able to access it? So I think the idea is to look at the various options that are available. You've got bonds. If you don't have capacity for bonds, you can look at other tools that you can use to access it. I think I would just touch briefly on the diaspora part. For me, I think that's a very noble idea. But the idea now is to be able to create the kind of instrument where people can actually, that can meet their risk appetite. A lot of people have fun, as you said, but the question is, are we able to create a product that will address some of the concerns that the investor will want? So once we're able to do that, we can take that conversation forward and see how to bring in all the key stakeholders in pushing this global idea forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yemi. Tony?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me quickly touch on two things he has also mentioned. One, there's money. We've always had two groups of people. We meet, one says, we have a lot of money, we don't have projects. The other said, we have a lot of projects, we can't find the money. So what we're trying to do is, how do we bring these two communities together? What constitutes a project? Why would anybody want to put money in your project and in your country? He's talked about risk. Incidentally, much of Africa's risk is perceived risk, but it has become the reality. We've established so many de-risking instruments just to be able to attract the private capital into it. Assets under management, huge. But the ones in Africa, very minute. Why? Partly because of the risk and so many other things. So there are ways. But coming back to the bank specifically, for the civil society, you get frustrated when you hear 300 billion, 500 billion, and you ask yourself, you're just looking for 150,000. Why are we not met? So the African Development Bank has established a couple of smaller initiatives to allow those who are looking for that $1 million, $500,000 to come on board. But frankly, when you are coming on board, it's either we're going to work with you to strengthen your environmental and social governance system because it's a major requirement, and if you have it already, then we can work with you to see how you can access those monies. There are people those local communities, that water project you're talking about, $50,000 is a big deal for many people. And so we have some funds that are there, but they are quite interesting, a bit competitive, and so on. So that's about the funding and about the risk. So I think it is important that many of us here that are representing institutions, whether it's development banks or so, let's bear in mind that there is no positive discrimination against Africa in accessing funds. We talk about climate finance, Africa leading just 3% and so on. There isn't. Let's get good proposals, good projects done. Let's get our institutions to be accredited to global finance institutions. Then I'm certain that we will have what we need. Please, may I take permission to...
wait for 10 minutes. Cecilia.
Okay, I'll respond to the question on what have we benefited from this sustainability conversation so far. And, you know, if you've ever seen the photo of Lake Chad before and Lake Chad today, and you've heard about all of the insecurities, challenges going on along the Lake Chad area, and we want to have those conversations on insecurity without focusing on the fact that people around that area have totally lost their livelihoods. And what was a resource that was in abundance has now become a resource that people are fighting for. Then you don't ever want that to happen with other river basins or other lakes on the continent. And I think what part of this conversation on sustainability has actually brought about is consciousness of these issues and connecting the dots between livelihoods, insecurity, and availability and continued availability of natural resources. We're getting a better understanding of the risks, and I would say that that is very important. What else has it contributed? I would say increased funding sources. We clearly have had increased funding sources, and I would say even better pricing from those funding sources. We're beginning to see innovation in financing products, both locally as well as internationally. And I would say finally, we're also seeing new partnerships being created on the continent, outside of the continent. And this sustainability discussion, more than any other discussion, has actually brought private sector and the commercial banks closer to the development financing conversation. More than ever before, you actually now see private sector, commercial banks, sitting with development bankers, and they see themselves as partners. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. And what I also thought was interesting when we start talking about the smaller amounts, $50,000, is the potential role of VCs and angels in making that happen. Ahmed Atut, there's a seat for you. We've been playing musical chairs all day. And so since you're speaking last, you might as well take it up. Frank, back to you.
Okay, I think in the questions there's somebody who asked the impact on sustainability conversations. I may say that the conversation has been very positive because, as I said, for us having a catalytic law, we work with 19 banks right now, in commercial banks as well. And we always tell them that you guys, to be able to attract funds, sustainability is very key. You cannot really go around it. Whether you want it or you don't want it, it's very important. So the conversation around that has been very, very important. So as I am speaking, probably this is my last, as a CEO who is managing an institution, especially on development financing, we look into sustainability as very, very key because our survival for tomorrow, our ability to attract capital from the, other parties, development financial institutions, as well as development partners, really depends on sustainability. So what we have done and what we have said from the very beginning, we worked out with the Global Center on Adaptation with the support from AFDB, is to establish that whatever we are doing in TADB, sustainability is very key. And that's why we came up with sustainability framework tools which we have been using. And we are not only using it as TADB, we are passing over to other financial institutions in the country whom we are supporting to ensure that when they lend to agriculture, they lend to areas which are sustainable. And to do that, one of the products that we have credit guarantee scheme. And we, to incentivize these banks, we've told them that we guarantee to the tune of 70 as a normal. But when you do climate smart agricultural financing, we go up to 70%. And this has really called them to come and ensure that they can be able to identify more CSA projects which they need financing. And we've seen a lot of financing being done into this area. And that's what has been incentivizing these commercial banks to come in, because we've increased our level of guaranteeing up to 70%. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Frank. And as we gear towards the last 9 minutes of this, Dr. Simi Agama.
Well, the big elephant in the room is how does it get across to the people? And speaking to that question, fintech. So it is so easy. I mean, in terms of adaptation of financial technology, Africa is doing well. Let us deploy fintech into sustainability, getting across to everyone, get across to the demography that actually uses fintech. So when we speak about sustainability, we are speaking about the future. We are speaking about the living. We are speaking about, sustenance. We are speaking about a light. That light can only come from the demography we are speaking to, which Africa, has in excess. So fintech will be a great tool to reaching out to every person that we think we should get to in driving sustainability for today and for the future.
Very true to your PhD. That's how you know people earned their doctorate title. And so, Ahmed, you're giving us our closing vote, but before you do, I'm going to build a few connections on this stage that we're going to hold everybody accountable for. So last year we were on the stage and we signed the letter of intent between AFDB and the ISSB. And obviously, Yemi, you have proven today that not only is the AFDB owner of the ISSB standards, but you're also deploying them yourself with the task force that you've got on the table. What we've also heard from you is, so in other words, we have something that we've started here, and that next year we will manifest even more in terms of unlocking capital flows. What we heard between you, Frank, and Cecilia is we've heard that there's a lot more collaboration between DFIs and commercial banks on the back of sustainability. However, what we've also heard is what you have been able to achieve, Frank, in terms of unlocking capital from AFDB and other DFIs, and also ensuring that you're partnering with the banking sector, including microfinance institutions, has not yet been achieved in many other African jurisdictions. So clearly, Tanzania is a best practice model, and Cecilia is going to take on that task, being EcoBank, which is across over 30 countries, to see how that model can be replicated elsewhere. What I can also say is a gap between what you've said, because you didn't mention capital markets. And when the Secretary General was here, he asked me specifically to introduce Ahmed and Timi, because he wanted to make sure that between the bank and the capital markets, there was a connection. So clearly, Cecilia and Frank and Yemi, we have to make sure that it's not just the banking sector, the financial institutions, but it's actually deepening the capital markets. And so if we end where we started, Secretary General kicked us off this morning. Ahmed, he asked you to have a conversation with Timi. Timi asked you to have a conversation with Ahmed. Capital markets are at the center of unlocking the capital on the back of the ISSB disclosures, which is a shared and common language. So that is really the task that we are taking away. And Ahmed, that we're asking you to close on, almost with a declaration, because SG started with a declaration on the commitment to the ISSB. We're now asking you to make a declaration that we will stand on this stage next year with many more people in the room, because at last we will be talking about having unlocked capital. So we want to see the volumes that we will unlock, not just in terms of foreign capital coming in, but also in terms of local currency. Yemi, it's going to be on your neck to hold us all to account and to follow up with us. You know all of our numbers and all our email addresses. It's 5 minutes to 11. Ahmed, the floor is yours, and then we will close with a photo. I think because we're so few people in the room, we can actually all come forward at that point in time and take a group photo to commemorate this moment, and we can all hold ourselves accountable. Would you like to go to the podium, or would you like to stay there?
Thank you so much, and I will not make a declaration, I will state facts. So, so I think the Secretary General has said it, and he's right, but I think the facts I want to say that we have already moved ahead with the sustainability. And I think I'm very proud to share that in the last 2-3 financial years, we closed around 2.5 billion worth of sustainability-linked loans and bonds for both private sector and sovereign transactions. That is really something very important, very significant, because it was related to, one, the quality of the sustainability frameworks delivered by the republics, and also the existing sustainability frameworks produced by the private sector. I was with a client yesterday, and I told him I can, in a sovereign context, I can deal with default. I have no problem with a sovereign to default, but I cannot deal with a sovereign that is not reporting quality information or disclosing the right information. And that's why we are very proud to say that we have signed the letter of intent with ISSB. It is something very important, and I thank ISSB and ATFI for their contribution and support to AFAC, which we have established at the African Development Bank to be the voice of African financial sector in the global venues. And I think the collaboration with ISSB and ATFI is instrumental in delivering this message. So I agree with you, and I think this is what I can commit, that we will keep unlocking capital. We will keep deepening capital markets in Africa. We will keep promoting access to long-term local and foreign currency funding for the real sector. And last but not least, we will keep also introducing and mobilizing institutional funding from pension funds, insurance companies, through innovative de-risking structures that, as I said before, we have been very successful in doing it in a very innovative manner. Going forward, we have already dealing with the regulators in Nigeria, in Ghana. I don't want to mention the names because we have actually been working with most developed and even underdeveloped capital markets in Africa. So please rest assured that capital markets development in Africa has been on top of our agenda yesterday, today, and tomorrow. This is something that I can really declare, and this is the declaration I can make. But other than that, thank you so much, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Very good declaration. We accept. And now a photo. Everybody come forward so that we can capture this moment. Thank you to our great panelists. Can I have a big round of applause, please, for this incredible...